Dear friends, let's continue with the third session. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch and had the opportunity to network and discuss different topics. For the third session, democracy, sustainability, how can we cooperate to advance intergenerational justice and democracy education in Europe? I would like to welcome here the moderator of this panel, the Vice Chairman of Estonian National Youth Council, Mr. Mikk Tarros.
So hello all of you, it's really nice to moderate this session. As Roger mentioned, I'm the Vice Chairman of the Estonian National Youth Council, and today's topic goes a bit more towards practical side and current gaps of or maybe lacking problems with intergenerational sort of injustice, and also focusing more on the citizenship education and different dilemmas regarding our educational system and what can we really change on a grassroots level today in order to enhance both voting turnout and, as panelists from different other discussions have mentioned, like how to make this citizenship education more practical in order to enhance or lose the arguments of young people being not educated enough. So this is our sort of main topic today that we are discussing. We have a lot of panelists, so I wouldn't really do more of a longer speech anymore. I would like to invite here Argo Kerb, who's a communication advisor for the Government Office of Estonia, and he will talk about as mentioned in the first panel, should we protect students in schools, school environment, and principles of electoral promotion in school environment. So a topic that was sort of debated in the first debate, and as mentioned before, Estonia has made significant sort of guidelines for schools to sort of promote this equal representation and great sort of citizenship education. So I will let Argo to continue with the keynote speech.
Thank you. I'm going to talk to you about a rather controversial topic. But first of all, I'm very grateful for the organizers for inviting me. I'm at the moment not working in education field, which I have to clarify a bit because I'm here not in my capacity as a government office official, but rather as a former education official and also a former education activist. I worked for 5 years in Ministry of Education and Research as a head of communications, also was responsible for inclusion policies. And before that, I was editor of Education Journal and editor-in-chief of DJ's newspaper. So what I say today is my own opinion, just to be clear. And, however, back to the question in hand. First, should we protect students in school environment? Of course we should. The question is against what we should protect students. We're talking here about some undue influence. Meaning when children come to school in the morning, children themselves and the parents, they assume that the school employees or politicians, teachers, headmasters, they do not use their the cover of their status to forward their personal, ideological or political agenda. For example, in primary school, try to influence the parents to their children. Well, that's quite elementary. But when we're talking about 16 and 17-year-olds, that's a bit different story, because they have been given the right to vote, and therefore the right and even obligation to make up their own mind. The school cannot filter what they know or what they don't know. We can say that they do not have, in that sense, a restricted active legal capacity as 16-year-olds have in many other areas of their life where some decisions must be made for themselves or by the legal guardian or whatever. But like adults, he or she, 16, 17-year-old, is able to make up his or her own mind. So therefore, the information she or he receives should not be filtered somehow by school or any other institution. Therefore, the question I do propose, or at least I propose as a small change in the question in the title, is not whether we should protect students in school environment, but rather should we protect school itself as the institution, because should we protect school from becoming a battleground for, let's say, electoral political ideas prior to elections, for example? And that was the question that was asked from us before we wrote down a document with our partners from Estonian National Youth Council and the Estonian Chancellor of Justice. But we will get to that. Well, but the question that was asked from us is maybe we should ban politicians and even the word politics from the school. Because there were some fears. Just to run in front of me, of course we shouldn't ban politicians from schools. Neither we should ban word politics from schools. Because we expect from our children, I'm talking about those who aren't yet 16 or 15 even, but we expect them to become involved in debates in our society. We expect them to respect and use the democratic tools and processes to become fully active citizens when they grow up and participate in the political process. How do you define grow up in this context? When you're 16-year-old, you can vote. It's that easy. But nevertheless, there have to be some principles or rules about how politics and schools do mix. And there are some rules. And almost all the politicians and school professionals or education professionals, they know those rules. But as elections came closer last year, so did the questions about, but what are those principles? Maybe we should write up those principles. And now that our 16 and 17-year-olds are able to vote, maybe the rules have changed somehow, which they didn't, by the way. But what was the fear? First of all, there was a fear that politicians use school as so-called cheap platform to reach wide audiences. Meaning, for example, you can, in high school, you have about 300 pupils who are 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and you can get, theoretically, all of them into one big room. And for politicians, it's a cheap way to reach them. It's much cheaper in municipal elections than to use other instruments in marketing or political campaigns. It's a bit tempting, and there were some fears, and past showed that some politicians might think that it is a good idea. Not many of them, but some. Second fear was that local politicians who control the schools might use their power or the control over school budget, over hiring decisions, because municipality hires their headmaster, or headmaster hires the teachers, just to get preferential access to students who themselves are voters, and to them also to the parents. Also a bit justified, but not widespread, and the evidence itself was anecdotal and spread over many, many years. Couple of instances. Third fear was general. Fear that politicians use the credibility or the bonus trustworthiness of the space of a school to forward their personal agenda by, for example, becoming actively involved in, for example, arranging school trips. It's okay for politicians to arrange school trips, but not a month before elections. And it has happened that politicians decided that this is the best time to get pupils out of the school and to be the one who tells them what this castle is about, for example, in front of the bus. But again, not many examples in the past. And the question was not generally, should the politicians be active in the community and in the schools, but only just on the eve of elections. So the calls came out to put the rules and principles down in writing, and they came from both sides, from schools and politicians, not that much from parents. Parents weren't really that active there. But politicians and teachers and headmasters wanted to be sure what are so-called rules of the game, just to avoid any problems that might arise from any misunderstandings, however you define it. And in the end, those principles were written down by, as I said, by Ministry of Education. At that time, I was leading the project, Estonian National Youth Council, and Chancellor of Justice. And it was called Elections and School, Principles of Ensuring the Neutrality of an Education Institution During Elections, or Municipal Elections. Those were principles, not rules that are somehow legally enforced, some sanctions, maybe fine if you behave wrongly. There was some calls for stricter regulation. There were pressures even on the minister to make up some law to somehow regulate, because it's much more easily understandable if it's written in law. If you do something wrong, then you will be punished. But we found that, first of all, you cannot write common sense into a law. And we have enough laws that regulate how we live. This is the consensus over the political establishment. So we decided to write down principles that in essence were simple, but simple principles are the gray zone, so to speak, was quite wide. So instead of 3 sentences, which was the point, we had 3 pages. Well, and in hindsight, there were some negative reports that Youth Council people know better about, I guess because they were part of the oversight, but almost none of those fears I told you about came true, which is great. And none of those fears came true in large scale. There was even not a hint about it, so that was especially great. But those principles, the main principle that we published a couple of months before the election was simple. School must be party politically neutral environment meant for teaching and education activities. Lowering the voting age has not changed the principle in any way. For that reason, educational institutions must refrain from any activities that may call the neutrality into question, meaning political ads, campaign advertising, and any political messaging should not use the space of a school, be it physical or digital. We did not try to say that, I don't know, if there's advertisement over the street and not on the school premises, it should be taken down. But you just cannot use the space of a school that has some, I don't know, deeper value or some additive value. You just can't use that kind of space for political messaging, which was quite easy. All the gray areas were quite large. For example, if you have a pen, and you know, you can write advertisements on pen. And if a pupil or student comes to school and uses pen that has some advertising on it, is it bad or is it not bad? Well, we didn't regulate it. We left it for common sense to resolve, and usually common sense prevailed. And which is okay. It was often misunderstood that no, any political debate in school is prohibited. Of course not. Debates over worldviews and ideologies are very welcome. And if they're done in accordance with school curriculum and the principle of school neutrality. And the rule is especially important when elections are at hand. But we have years in between where they're not that important. And politicians who want to visit schools, they're welcome to visit schools. They cannot do straight political propaganda, but they can speak students about their work, how state or local level functions, because here in Parliament you can see students come in and out to see how it works every day, and it's okay. So the same way politicians can go to school. And who decides what are the rules in the school? based on those principles, which, as I said, was common sense, which we extracted from down. Well, school-specific rules should be decided by the headmaster in close cooperation with the teachers, parents, and students. Because if you have some rules that everybody must understand, the easiest way to enforce those rules is to create them together. And it's usually worked, especially in larger high schools where headmasters were quite active. And there are still difficult gray areas, but those didn't bother much, at least during those elections. If somebody wants examples, I can give you afterwards, but yeah. And in conclusion, the question was, should we protect students in school environment? Yes, against physical dangers and so on, but we should not protect students from political discourse, at least when speaking about 16-plus-year-olds. But we have to guard the principle that school is for teaching and education, that the space of the school, be it digital or physical, is for education. And I do believe, personally, that our schools are able to guard their own integrity. And most of the education professionals, parents, and politicians understand these principles that we brought down intuitively. And this is why those principles work. We just wrote down what everybody thought was right. Thank you.
Thank you, Argo. You can sit. So we heard a really interesting topic about how we can sort of protect the students, but as Argo mentioned, it's still important to show how politics work by also inviting politicians to school. So in regards of that, now we are turning more to the civic education side. How should the 21st century civic education should look like? And I would like to invite Kirsi Ruhanen, who is the Managing Director of Association for Teachers of History and Social Studies in Finland. Please come to do your keynote.
I have to turn this into horizontal position almost. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm glad to be here. In the national core curriculum for basic education in Finland, it's written that basic education is built on respect for life and human rights. It directs the pupils to defend these values and to appreciate the inviolability of human dignity. Basic education promotes well-being, democracy, and active agency in civil society. This is a direct line from the new curriculum. And this is the basis of all education in Finland, but I think it could also be the short version of the Finnish civic education curriculum for elementary school. Teaching of civics or social studies, as we tend to call it, includes elements from political science, economics, and law. Teaching of these subjects nowadays starts in grade 4 when the pupils are 10 years old. Former, it started at age of 15. In grades 4 to 6, or the lower elementary school, the emphasis of social studies is to familiarize the pupils with communal life and interaction. The pupils are encouraged to listen to each other, to express their opinions, and to justify their views, as well as to find their own strengths. The pupils practice decision-making and the skills needed for interacting. Their interest in working life and entrepreneurship is strengthened. The pupils are familiarized with basics of managing both personal finances and also responsible consumption. In teaching in grades 4 to 6, it's essential to use interactive experimental, and functional working methods. These could be, for example, simulations, discussions, debates, and drama. Of course, the key concepts are explained to the pupils by the teacher, but they are encouraged in finding, understanding, and applying information themselves. The main focus is on society and economy that's significant for their own lives and for their own future. These are the 4 core elements or contents in the lower elementary school, and these all are looked at from my point of view, which means from the pupil's point of view, of course. And in grade 9, the key contents are the same. The pupils are in grade, they are 15 years old, and the task of the subject is to provide them with the knowledge base of how the society works and how citizens can be involved. The pupils are also encouraged to become independent societal and economic actors. They practice their skills in critically acquiring and assessing information produced by different actors. The pupils practice decision-making and involvement, and they are guided to evaluate issues and to compare the different opinions and ways of acting. The objective is to support the pupils' growth into active citizens by using diverse functional working approaches. In teaching, it's essential to continuously follow, analyze, and discuss current issues and events. Interactions with different actors in society is also important, and in Finland, what he talked about earlier, it's very common to, for example, ask politicians to school and to debate matters even not during the elections or before them. It's very common to have politicians on school and widely not, well, it's, yeah. Yeah. The objective is to support pupils' growth into, yeah, I said that already. Yeah. The Association for Teachers of History and Social Studies promotes teaching skills and not the information. And by that we mean that we don't want the children to be taught only facts. We want them to be analytical and critical. We want them to be able to make and express their own views. We want them to be interested in the society they are living and the ways to develop it. We want them to be able to manage both their own finances as well as Finland in future. And we want them to be able to tell the difference between the fake news and the news. And we believe that the information expires, but the skills do not. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Kirsi. I think it's really good notice that the skills matter, not the exact information. But to go in further about our future generations and how the sort of the democracy should work maybe in the future, René Kieselhorst from Foundation for the Rights of Future Generations is next up for our keynote speech, and he's going to talk about what are the intergenerational justice impacting megatrends that the young people should be aware of. So I would welcome you, René, to the keynote speech.
Thank you. Thank you, Mick, and thank you also to the organizers. I'm really happy to be here. My name is René. I'm an ambassador for the German Foundation for the Rights of Future Generations, and Mick asked me to prepare a bit about the intergenerational justice impacting megatrends that we as young people and that future generations should be aware of. As you can imagine, this is quite a broad topic, and if I would talk in detail about it, we would probably not only be here today, but for the next couple of days. So I picked out a couple of those multiple and broad challenges we're facing, and we'll shortly talk about it, but we'll more than focus on the underlying issue that's the problem with it and how we can maybe solve that by lowering the voting age in several countries and how to engage young people to be aware of those challenges. So if we look at those problems, for example, or at those challenges, for example, digitalization, as Kirsi just mentioned, if we look at elections, we have a rise of fake news or alternative facts that is influencing how we make decisions, how those elections, I mean, for example, in the US or in the UK, turned out. And this is not only a problem that young people face, but that we face as a whole of society. And there are other trends emerging, for example, artificial intelligence or automatization, where we cannot even fathom yet how this will change our society in the future. And if we look at environmental problems such as climate change, the loss of biodiversity or land degradation, and how to feed a population that will grow until 2050 and even further, we have so many decisions to make now that have such a long-lasting impact that we're not able to just think in 4 or 5 year election cycles. So basically most of these other challenges, also access to education, rising nationalism in countries, financing pensions, access to health, gender equality, those are becoming more and more broad, and they require long-term thinking, analytical skills, and unprecedented collaboration, not only between countries, but also between generations. This becomes a problem if we're looking at how the society, at least in Europe, will be changing over the next couple of decades. Europe as a whole will be aging quite substantially. I was looking at the numbers for Estonia, and at the moment, the population in Estonia, there are about 15% of the population who are 15 or younger, so they are not able to vote at the moment, and there are about 20% of the whole population who are 65 or older. If we look at the European Commission's projections until 2070, the share of society which is 15 or younger will stay more or less the same, while the share of society which is 65 or older will rise to about 1/3 of the whole population. So if we don't do anything about it, then the electoral base will shift quite substantially towards the older age, which is not necessarily a problem, but if we look at the tendency that older voters have more short-term objectives than younger voters, we tend to end up with short-term decision-making and not the decisions we need to tackle those problems I just mentioned. I mean, obviously not every old person is not in favor of tackling those problems, and not every young person is deeply in favor of doing those, but as a general issue, younger people are more prone to think about those topics and are more interested in them because they will live with the effect, whereas you, I mean, ask yourself, how old will you be in 2050, how old will you be in 2070? And if you then have to decide about issues that will only take effect 10, 15, 20 years later, then you might know why you might prefer short-term solutions over long-term solutions. In general, young people are not as disenchanted with politics as the media, or not as we sometimes think. Even if we look at the surveys that are done within around general elections, even if they're asked if they're interested in politics, they might say no, but if you then ask how they think about housing, how they think about access to healthcare, about job opportunities, about the environment, this might be different, because then people say this topic is important to them, so they might think politically, but they might just be yeah, disillusioned by the current political system and how politicians represent them. So what we what young people are more interested in generally is those long-term topics, and to also further talk about to mention what I think Patrick mentioned before, is that young people are not necessarily biased towards certain political parties. If we look at the outcome of, at least in Germany, of the votes from young people of about 16, 17 who now voted, that doesn't change much over the age cohort of 18 to 30. Young people in general are a bit more biased towards liberal left-leaning parties, but in general it's not like they will just vote for more radical or fun parties or just throw their vote away. There's not that much change. So on the one hand, there's not really an incentive for any political party to push a lower voting age forward, but there's also not really, there should not really be an objection from any political party if they look at this fact. Even though, on a personal note, I think a lower voting age should not be linked to either incentive or blocking from any of these parties, because, as we heard also before, this is part of a democratic state. So we as Foundation for the Rights of Future Generations came up with some of those solutions to both help young people to become more engaged in this discourse, and also to tackle those long-term political problems that we cannot really solve in 1 or 2 election cycles. So one of the possible solutions we already heard quite often today is setting up new ways to engage and interact with younger people, to show them that their interests are valuable, so to make them feel that their ideas are worth something, and that they actually can influence something, and that they are not disregarded. We also advocate for right to vote from birth on, so we would still like to have a default right to vote from, for example, 16-year-olds or maybe 14, 12-year-olds. But for every person that is younger, they should be able to just go to the city council or municipality and register in their voters registry, so that they can from then on take part in the general elections. And also we just released a new paper on future-proof institutions, where we developed a couple of ways to future-proof German institutions, but some of them are transferable also to other countries. And I picked 2 of them to show them here. In Germany, we are thinking about implementing or strengthen a sustainability impact assessment for draft regulations, so that every ministry should be required, if they propose a new law, to give an assessment how this law could impact the both environment as well as the political environment for the next decades, and what outcomes would be done with it. And also we propose that each newly elected federal government should present its long-term political plans over the next 30 years when they are elected. So this long-term perspective, which takes place about 1 generation or 30 years, could influence how they implement laws, and how this will be put in context with the general idea on how to proceed as society. And as a last point, I want to say that even though younger people tend to think more in the long term and older people tend to think more in a short term in these political spaces, we should avoid an intergenerational conflict. We are facing so many broad and complex issues as society that it needs both young and old generations, and basically everybody we have to be there, and that we need to find a way how to make the laws and the policy decisions we have as society future-proof. Thank you.
It's good that you mentioned future plans, because of course there's important to also educate decision makers. So that's why our next guest Dr. Anu Krechel from the senior researcher of the Finnish Youth Research Network is giving a keynote about why decision makers need democracy education more than the youth need. So, please.
Hi. There is so many fine things said already today. It's not a pleasure being the second last. If I still have some room to say something new, I would be delighted. But anyway, at least I can prefer many of the presentations already said. So there is a good, we could write a book about all these arguments heard today. So I'm Anu Krechel, researcher. I'm coming from north of Finland. It's always important to say that not all in Finland are living in Helsinki. I'm living in Kajaani, and I'm voluntarily live in East North Finland and still doing science, I think. When I heard first time about this seminar, I felt that I must come here to say that these decision makers are those who need democracy education, because I was afraid that if I'm not coming to say this here, no one is saying, but I was delighted, Johannes almost said that society needs changes in attitude if we ask young people to vote or any kind of participation. So I could have opportunity to choose if I'm coming, if I would know that you are here to say that. But anyway, I'm here. I have done my career as a youth researcher is very long, over 20 years. I have been studying youth participation, youth work, democracy, all this kind of stuff, and mostly with the action research way. And these are my theses about how could we find how could we support the successful interaction between youth and the society. So I see this voting 16 idea as a one kind of relationship between young people and society. It's only one piece of all those communication flows we can have. And I'm afraid in some cases we try to put this one relationship alone to stand up that without seeing the whole environment we have in as a communication environment. And if there is only this one connection, it may fail. We must support, of course, it has said many times, civic education need to be changed, need to be more active, but all kind of participatory channels should be opened, wide open at the same time. And that would support this success in this vote 16 also. And first of all, my argument is that if we don't see the young people as competent and capable as a members of society, this cannot work. This is the main thing we must have. It's an attitude thing in a society, how we see young people. And actually, as a researcher, this is the thing I need to say all the time. Main point is that see young people capable. And I've been saying this 20 years, I still need to say this. And then there are these international agreements and national laws and things like a directive, this one from the European level. They come as a second, but this attitude thing is the first one, which is needed. And then the picture of the broad democracy, voting is not enough. And like said, we need the future plans also as a youth work, as a youth research, as a young people. How we plan, what we are doing now, how we plan that this is going to be developed in next years and not give up the fight. Youth workers, Sometimes they are, for example, in the local municipalities in Finland, they are those who have still the trust that these young people here, they should, these are chosen, for example, for the local youth council. They don't know yet what the task is going to be. I should motivate them. At the same time, this youth work, for example, must motivate the decision makers. And sometimes it's it takes so slowly steps that you may give up as a youth worker, as a teacher, as a politician, as a young people. It doesn't work because society is a system which works. If we don't do anything, it's not a participatory. It works like a system work with a knowledge of adults, with a hope of adults. They know already, they have been here already earlier. They know how the things go quicker, cheaper, better. They think that they go also that the things would be more sustainable, but that's not the truth. We need to have a trust even after 20 years that we can have some progress altogether. And there is always some people needed who never give up the hope. But the opportunities with voting, with all participatory channels, there must be the possibility to have a real, reasonable and meaningful impact. Otherwise it's a tokenism what we are offering to young people. And we should measure the quality of all participatory project channels, stuff we are establishing. We should measure the quality of those products. So, and we should see if young people have the view that their role have developed. It's not only the concrete results, all the project, all the things produced, but also the knowledge young people have about their role, if that has somehow better during these processes. But when we go back to the first argument, we need training for the decision makers. And they need it most, because this is a list from the real life. Funny thing was that Johannes was also mentioning that in 2008 in Austria, media or some people were saying that maybe the young people are not mature enough. In Finland, 2008, local politicians did actually say things like these. And there was a possibility to document this because we were organizing deliberative discussion days between local politicians and young people. Not only the youth council, the people's council, but also the young people from the youth centers, from the employment courses. All kinds of young people were invited to have a day. First they evaluated the services for young people, and then they discuss directly, face to face with the local politicians from the top level, 2 hours, to give their opinions what could be developed. And there was a roadmap made, and results were followed if there has been an impact. So it was a real occasion to have an impact. But when we started this, we chose 20 municipalities in Finland, all over Finland, by a lot. And when we first meet the politicians, they said things like this during the discussion or before when we gave them training. But second and third year, when we went back, they never said things like this anymore. They learned during the first meeting with the young people, when young people were given an opportunity to prepare themselves to give really statements, arguments, questions. So decision makers learned away from these kind of arguments already based on one interactive meeting with young people. So what we need more, that of course lists like this to show that we notice when when the people or politicians or media are talking about young people like this. We must make put a light on this and say that this is not the truth. You can't say this kind of arguments. And then we must give opportunity to young people and decision makers and the big publicum to meet each other in a very negotiative way. We even printed that as a postcard. And there is a text. Is the situation so in your municipality? Don't worry, we can come to help you. We will organize this kind of discussion day in your municipality. My greetings in the end of my presentation are quite easy and light. Just mentioning 2 European projects we have at the moment. My research network in Finland is participating in 2 projects related to participation at the moment, which are funded by Erasmus+. And you will find the prospects on the table there when you leave the room. So the first one, I'm studying best practices which are collected in an NGroup project. It's a project for building up a network between local and regional youth platforms in Europe. And we have collected the good practices, and now I'm using those practices as a data, but I'm reflecting YouthWiki database information, offering information from the same countries, and also we will be in contact in those countries in other researches to make the picture more valid. And interesting is that in our project there are associations and municipalities included in so different kind of countries what comes to the democratic situation at the moment. There are Italy, Finland and UK, Portugal, Hungary and Romania. So we can learn a lot about what is at the moment the democratic situation. And what I want to say in the end is that you can find information about participation of young people in YouthWiki database. I'm a national correspondent for Finland, writing YouthWiki database with my colleague Karla Malm in Finnish Youth Research Network. And there are 27 countries now participating in database. It's free for all. If you need information, background information about participation structures in different countries, you can use this database. We are updating it yearly, and it's going to, maybe next 5 years, we are going to update it. It follows the themes of the European youth strategy. And for example, 5.7 is important. Learning to participate through formal, non-formal and informal learning. So we have categorized these different kind of examples of countries to be found there. And for example, 5.2, we are asked to write about if there has been any vote 16 trials in the country. So you can find this kind of information nowadays in this YouthWiki database.
Thank you, Anu. And from another international experience, we will go to another one, which will talk about one of a cool project that the University of Tartu has done. It's about constructing active citizenship with European youth. And I would like to ask Mari-Liis Tikerberg here to present us about what should we improve to raise new generation of young citizens. So brief overview of the project and the results.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, dear audience. I'm the last one. Not so easy job. I'm Mari-Liis Tikerberg, and right now I'm a PhD student and scientist at University of Tartu. But I have not worked as youth worker and teacher. As you know, once a youth worker, always a youth worker. And being a teacher, it's sometimes more like a chronic diagnosis, not a profession, right? So all topics linked with youth and education are very important for me, and I'm so happy to be here today. My speech today will focus on active youth generally, not so much on the political context. And I will mainly introduce you the results of a study which was carried out in Estonia as a part of international project constructing active citizenship with European youth, or shortly Catch EU. Spoiler alert, nothing new. You have heard all of it today. But I'm the last one, you will remember it. I will introduce the project very briefly. The project involves 8 countries in Europe. The main purpose of the project is to identify the factors influencing the different forms of youth active engagement in Europe. Those factors are located at different levels, like psychological, developmental, macrosocial, and contextual. There are 10 work packages in the project, and my role in this project is to work with work package 6, schools and education. To interpret the results correctly, it is very important to mention that it was a qualitative study, which means that we can't generalize those results to all schools, students, and teachers, and all results are relevant only with those respondents. As you see, 8 focus groups and 17 interviews with teachers. So, the main results based on those interviews. Students' activity and motivation to participate in societal activities depends on personality, but also on their native language and community. If the depending on personal interest was a typical aspect in the studies in other countries, then differences between students with different native language, in our context, differences between Estonian-speaking and Russian-speaking students were brought only in Estonia. It's something special here. The second point, and actually most of the next points are common generally in other countries and in Estonian study as well. Active students are usually occupied with different activities on different levels. I'm quite sure we all know some classmates who were active everywhere, or we were or we are those students, right? According to teachers' opinion, our students are not highly interested in politics, maybe only 10 to 25%, but they are often misunderstood by schoolmates. About a week ago, I read an opinion that politicians should not visit schools, and Argo was talking about it a bit more. But at the same time, the study brought out that schools are the best environments for youngsters to communicate and act with other people, especially with mates in their age. In addition to schools, they have same possibilities in youth organizations, in different projects, in hobby classes, or in work. But if we can presume that those other possibilities are mostly used by more active students, then schools have a chance to bring activities to less active, I don't want to say passive, less active students. And I'm happy to say that according to students' and teachers' opinions, our schools have many formal and informal activities to support students' activity. Mostly they are empowering them as active citizens, but at the same time, some students told that sometimes they feel like schools are pushing them into passive role, especially in younger grades. Students told that it happens that schools don't ask their opinion, or when they ask, they don't take into account. According to students' opinion, when they want to be more active or be heard, the biggest problems are their young age, lack of information or courage, and in political context, the problem is politicians' low reputation. As the project's aim was mostly mapping the situation, our recommendations were formulated during a seminar we had in cooperation with Accept Project's team. The seminar took place in the end of April this year and involved delegates from schools, youth organizations, and different communities. Speaking about raising active citizens in educational context, our participants found out that one of the most important aspects is to support teachers, school leaders, and actually all school workers. We should give them skills, understandings, and knowledges. They are people who are working with little people every day. They need skills. Then, we are not talking only about school teachers. We should also support teachers in kindergartens because they can support kids' self-sufficiency and involve them to affordable decisions in early age. But schools and kindergartens shouldn't be alone. We were sure that by developing cooperation between schools, businesses, local government, and community, we can extend many possibilities to our youth. To all adults, teachers, parents, youth workers, friends, I would remind to avoid pseudo-involvement. Don't ask youngsters' opinion if you are not going to think about it, at least, or you are not ready to discuss. How to do that, and how to make easier to follow those recommendations? By acting and by sharing good practices on every aspect, by sharing inspiration. And again, I guess it's the most important aspect. It's crucial to emphasize the key is involving youngsters on every level, in every sector of society. They are our present and our future. We all have heard, we all have been youngsters, or we are youngsters. And sadly, we use very often sentences like, you are too young. When you grow old, one day you will. One day you have to. For the next generations, let's make the one day be today. Thank you.
Thank you for the closing remarks. We still have some debate left. Before we go into the questions, I would like to spice up the debate a bit by asking a question of my own, which I sort of had before, and it struck out even more in those keynote speeches. As also Renee mentioned that most of the young people today don't have a sort of a straight worldview, or they don't affiliate themselves with the parties, and also our Estonian research has shown that 46% of the youth doesn't really follow a specific worldview. So therefore, the question: is it sort of a really opening way of thinking among youth, or is it just a current or a result of current civics education sort of result that the young youth don't want to be affiliated with the parties, or they don't know how to affiliate themselves? So it's a matter of question how our civics education has sort of coped, and I think that's a question for all of the panelists. So if anyone would like to start right away, I would give the floor to you. Yeah.
Question: I wouldn't put that much responsibility on school. It's quite often if something is not as we would like it to be, and it's in some ways in school curricula, we look at the school. Oh, sorry. I wouldn't put so much responsibilities on school. It's quite often we look at something that's wrong in society, and we see that similar thing is in school curricula, and therefore school has to do something more. That's the question of, I guess it's the image of politicians is much wider than what schools, civic education, etc. can never solve. So I'd say the image of politicians, it's not problematic in just one country. I guess it's questioned in most of Western and non-Western democracies. So I can't really even guess any answer to that.
Yeah, I began to think that maybe society has changed faster than the parties, and the people or youth may have opinions on some matter, but and they can refer that to one party, but maybe on another matter they kind of refer to another party. So maybe the parties should kind of develop themselves as well to kind of face the modern city living people, maybe.
I would agree that, I mean, I don't know the numbers for Estonia, but in Germany the parties that we have are quite established, and even though there are sometimes new coming up, both major parties have been there for ages. And young people in general tend to not affiliate with parties as much anymore, but are more driven into project-based participation. So they engage in NGOs in their communities, in some other projects they set up, which are not as bound to a longer time frame as affiliation with a party is, but more to a specific topic, and which can also take a couple of years. But as Chris said, it's more driven for a certain topic than for the general ideology of the party. And I also don't think that schools should set up pupils in a way that they should affiliate with certain parties, but more that, as it was also mentioned before, that they are able to critical analyze those topics and to see which party, in case of an election, would support this, or where else they can make an impact.
That's true that there are lack of young people among the decision makers in Finland. From local to national level, there are only 6 to 7% of decision makers are under 29 years old, meaning young, based on Finnish law. Quite recently, there has been several working groups producing theses how to modernize the way the parties are, for example, working. Some of them even suggest that governmental funding should be depending on if the party is somehow modernizing the way it is working. So there are discussions about these thematics. At the same time, like said earlier in this seminar, the question is also understanding what actually is politics. Politics is like a life, was said here earlier. When we discuss with the young people and decision makers in the local level, young people are very interested, and both are satisfied, young people and decision makers afterwards, and they are very enthusiastic. They have found each other. How they can find each other in a more broader way than not only through during the discussion days, I don't have any answers yet, but we must develop the case probably in the several ways, modernizing the parties and opening up face-to-face discussion possibilities between different age groups and power, between the people in power and between young people.
So my work is to be the last, and it's very, very hard to add something. I have to say that this project-based approach or participation is very common in Estonia as well. But just a thought about politics. What if we lose the names of different parties? Because with losing names, we will lose different persons and faces. And we are talking only about how we see things when we are liberals, when we are in central. And maybe it could help to give the information to youngsters. Just a thought.
Thank you. Are there any questions or regarding the similar approach? Okay, if not, then I can maybe continue. Also about the education part, as I would make maybe examples from Estonia, maybe our side has sort of or our culture of participating in school life, as previously mentioned also in the first panel, is more towards this obedient sort of version, whereas students tend to be more quiet or tend to not to distract the class in a way or give out their opinions. So as also in regards of the future civic education, how can this sort of culture of discussing and different methods can be developed both by school and by the civic education or other classes? So how can we sort of get this way of students being more active or more interested or more hands-on approach, as mentioned, that students or young people want to have this more hands-on approach? How can we sort of implement this into our education system more?
I would say revolution in attitudes, how classes are being taught, how school is being defined, has been ongoing at least here in Estonia for the last 15 years. You can find schools that are, maybe their educational level is similar, but their attitudes towards pupils can be 180 degrees different. And when we're talking about high schools, for example, then we have high schools that function like extended basic schools, just class after class. Then we have high schools that function like small universities, where students have to make choices in their curricula, have to take responsibility for the choices, where they have seminars instead of classes. And at least looking at the wider picture, I think the problem is solving itself. There isn't just one revolution that revolutionizes everything, but the understanding that things have to change, and the change itself is manifold, I would say. It has many different ways of expressing itself, is ongoing, and I think in 10 or 20 years we will see the results in more uniform way. We can say that it has changed, but today we just have some anecdotal evidence one way, anecdotal evidence another way, but the change is ongoing. How the school function involves students, and we can see the results if we look at them today.
Yeah. In recent study, I think it was OECD, maybe I can remember better, Finnish ninth graders were studied to have a good knowledge base and capabilities needed to be active citizens, but they are just not interested in being ones. So the great challenge in teaching is to raise the interest and enthusiasm amongst the pupils, and that's why I would like to refer to the Austrian example presented here before, that the only answer is to show the importance of politics and economy and legal questions and etc. to the students.
Yeah. I think that one of the key points is, and I have to agree there, that we need to give students the opportunity to take over responsibility and to also, as I think you mentioned earlier, to not give them this pretense that they can partake and then are not recognized in what they're doing. I think the age from when on you might want to be politicized and want to participate can differ between 10, 11, 12 years old, but for some people it might only be in their 20s. So just making a decision based on when they are actually starting is giving a false pretense. I think we need to give them the opportunity, and from there on people can grow, and young people can grow with these challenges. The capability is definitely there also for younger people.
Let me remind that it's not only the formal education, but we must think the society as such, which kind of opportunities, channels, tasks, positions of power we can open for young people.
I will repeat myself. Let's start in early age. Let's start in kindergartens. And actually, you made me think so that I'm going home and call to my daughter's teacher. She's 6, so kindergarten, and tell her that I want to organize a meeting with their kindergarten group because they want to build a new playground for our kindergarten, and I'm ready to organize a meeting with the oldest group in kindergarten and discuss which it should be, what they want, what they can do, what we have to do after we have this playground. Hold it clean or be nice with friends. This is the small model of big world. Let's start very early.
Very good words from Mari-Liis. Maybe to continue about the intergenerational gap, since most of our sort of politicians, or even teachers, there's a lot of high number in high age teachers in Estonia, as well as, for example, in the European Union, there lives about 17% of youth, and only approximately 11% in the European Parliament is under the age of 40. So how can we sort of bring the more, can we sort of have to change the mindset of the current politicians or older people, or how can we sort of bring the young and older people together as we see, or should we sort of put some quotas in maybe in the parliaments, or do we have to? So, what would be the sort of the solution of getting the more older and younger people together, or to find sort of the new or common problems to solve? So, what would be, for example, your solutions for the intergenerational gap?
Yeah, I don't know about quotas, but what I have seen is when you really want to get elected as a politician and you're active enough, you do get elected. It's kind of proportional with your activity in that field. And the question is why that many younger persons don't really want to involve themselves in so-called hard politics that much. Well, I don't know. Is there a intergenerational conflict? Yeah, maybe in values, but I have worked with, I guess, 6 ministers. One of them was even younger than me, and I was at that time 29. So, and I have worked with ministers who are more than twice of my age. And I haven't seen, at least it's again my experience, that there is a divide between generations that much, but there is moderate divide on basic ideological levels about how the world should work. And maybe if there is or there was more younger people in parliament, the decisions would be different. But then again, somebody then has to elect them to parliament, and they have to get to parliament, and we again come back to the first question: why younger people don't try to get to parliament? Because I would say that in Estonia it isn't easy, but it's much easier than in any other country that I have been. So.
Well, I don't have a correct answer for the questions, but I began to think about social media and the way it has changed the role of politicians. To me, it's kind of reluctant, but for the young people, it may be easy way to get involved into politics. The new ways of promoting themselves. I don't know, but it may have some good effects on young people's activity in politics.
I don't know how much the election system in Germany differs from the Estonian one, but I noted that in Germany, for young people to get on the party list to be elected into parliament is quite hard to get into, because a lot of those people are, like a lot of the people already in parliament have been there for quite some time. And you usually need to stay and work in your hometown for quite some time, which is clashing a lot with the lifestyle young people are expected to live. If they want to go to university, they are also requested to study abroad, to maybe go somewhere else to university because the specific field is not taught at their home university. So investing this time in one certain area instead of, for example, in one certain topic in your party doesn't really pay off for a lot of people. And even the young ministers we had in the last couple of years in Germany were those people who spent also university in their hometown, who never really left their hometown and have been engaged in this field all the time there. And I think even though young people are also doing a lot of political engagement, the current political system there might just not be the perfect one to engage yourself in. And even if they are put on the party list, they are usually not on the promising spots, but mostly on the spots that are where it's a surprise if you actually are elected into parliament. And for that reason, we actually also propose to have certain quotas for young people in the promising spots and also in the decision-making parts of the, for example, of the parliamentary groups then.
This would be a very interesting research theme to find out why young people who may be interested in party politics, why they are not starting to be a candidates in, for example, national elections. Maybe it's a question of money. And you mentioned the new channels in social media, for example. They are not. It's not so costly anymore. But this, I don't have answers again. But I found this very interesting, and maybe we could produce a research and find it out.
So we are talking in Estonia. We are talking about the context of local government elections, right? And I can't show some results of studies or something, but I can speak about my experience. And the phenomenon I have seen in smaller communities was that the first contact with the party was always personal. Relatives or friends, or you were in the same hobby group, and then an adult, doesn't matter how old he or she was, and told to a young 18-year-old high school student mostly that please come to us, join the party and be a candidate with us. And there was only one reason actually to get the youngsters to attend in elections. And but yes, the first contact was always personal. But I can imagine it's much harder in big cities. It was easy. I'm from a small village, and I have to admit I'm local politician. So yeah, so it happens.
Okay, so we have a round for one last question. If no one from the... Yeah, awesome. Question from Austria.
Well, I rather have a comment concerning this last point, if I'm allowed to.
Yeah.
Okay. The thing with why is it so hard for young people to run for parliament? In my opinion and what I see from daily work, of course it would be nicer that we have more young people going to political parties and running for parliament or what else. For example, in Austria we have I think the youngest chancellor ever, I think worldwide. He's 31. This makes an effort, a difference. But I think if we say that it's better for young people when we have young politicians, can also be a little bit of a problem, because I think this is not a little bit a different idea of democracy, because in my idea of democracy, a good politician, no matter if he's male, if he's female, if he's old, if he's young, he considers, when he makes a decision, all people in Estonia, in Austria as well, and he thinks of all people. What consequences will my decision have? So I think it's not automatically that young people or young politicians address young interests more than elder ones. I heard this one example from Finland, where there's one young member of parliament, and the people that voted for him, they were elder people. So like retired people. What I think and what I see in Austria is, if you advocate issues of young interests, it does not really matter if you're old, if you're young, if you, I don't know, an apprentice or a student, you will get the votes. For example, for young people, legalizing marijuana in Austria is a big thing. Most young people that voted for the Green Party, they voted for them because they were the only ones who were dealing with this issue. So maybe one of the more central things that we should deal with is, how can we ask young people, what's your interest? No matter if I'm old, I cannot change if I'm old, if I have gray hair. But what I can change as a politician is I listen to young people and I try to take your issues, you know.
Thank you for the comment. And to wrap up our discussion, I would like all the panelists to sort of give one of your opinion how to enhance, like, what would you say to our your tomorrow to a politician or a decision maker, how or what should change in our education system or in our political system in order to enhance youth participation? So one suggestion.
Again, what kind of suggestion? There was a slide before about Finnish voting age that has been lowering during past 100 years. And my suggestion would be just show her or him, whatever table it is, that shows that the world is turning and changing. And what I would suggest is try not to stay behind, because you won't be elected maybe next time if you stay too much behind.
Yeah, so if I have to pick one, I would probably repeat my requests from before that we need institutions where politicians and the elected parties need to lay out what their laws are going to change in the next generation, the next 30 years, and how each law, what impact will this law have. So yeah, to put it in the bigger picture and not only go for the short-term interest.
My advice would be that use all the participatory channels, not only one.
So maybe we should take a slide tagasi. There are many recommendations, but the most important is the last one, involving youngsters everywhere.
Yes, I am supporting you with the last one.
Okay, thank you for our panelists. Let's make a big round of applause. And now, for the closing words, I will give the floor to Roger.
Thank you, Mick. Thank you, panelists. A round of applause for you again. So how to conclude this wonderful day full of different opinions, full of different topics? We had 3 different sessions today discussing the Estonian part, the European level, and now on a much broader sense of what we need to do in order to get in touch with more young people and to involve more young people and to get them be more active. I hope that everybody who was here today get to go home with some new ideas, some new thoughts, maybe some new contacts when it comes to lowering the voting age in your country or when you want to be a help to some other countries in the way or in the process. And definitely for the Estonian side, I can tell that me myself, I got some ideas and some points that definitely the Estonian National Youth Council has to consider and then think on how we can move forward with the Voted 16 topic and definitely the inclusion of more young people in different areas. So thank you for that, for all the panelists. But before I end it, I bet Christina wants to say something before I let you say something. I have to say a few kind words to some people myself. I got the chance to be the informator today, but the organizers put me in this spot because they knew I just like to talk a lot. And I'm not the one who's really contacted all of you and been the main organizer throughout the weeks and the months before the day. So I think the biggest round of applause and recognition that we should give from the Finnish side is the Children's Voice Association representative Kristiina Vares-Vartiova. And from the Estonian National Youth Council side, did he go away? I knew that if I'm gonna tell his name, he's gonna run away. But Karl-Andres Spreng from Estonian side is the one who contacted all of you and is the main brain behind this. And just one more thing, we can't go out from the same door that we came in. So for those of you who have your clothes in the wardrobe, I suggest you to go and get them, and we all meet back up here and we all go out together, because it's some sort of a maze and it's not that easy to go out the way we came in. And last but not least, we would also like to have a group picture with all of you in the room where there was the Riigikogu sign. So after Kristiina's words, let's all meet there and make a group picture. But I thank you very much.
So yes, thank you very much. And I also would like to thank Karl Spreng, who ran away. I must say he is a good example of a young person who actually today handed in his final bachelor's documents, bachelor's study. So a few weeks ago, I just learned that he was organizing the seminar, working for the, quite actively working for the youth organization, and also today actually handing in his final research. So I was amazed by his efficiency. And the precision which he showed in all this process. So thank you to Karl. And I mostly hope that you leave this room inspired. So there are not ready answers, but hopefully a lot of inspiring thoughts to carry out of this room. Thank you very much.